Max Verstappen stuns McLaren to claim pole position for the Japanese Grand Prix after setting a new lap record of the Suzuka circuit. Elsewhere, it was another difficult Saturday for Lewis Hamilton, whilst Yuki Tsunoda suffered a Q2 exit on his first qualifying session for Red Bull. From Racing News 365, my name is Nick Golding, and I'm delighted to be joined, as always, by lead editor Ian Parks. Ian, where on earth did that come from? I don't think anybody up and down the paddock amongst the media predicted a Max Verstappen pole position. Not only a pole position by 12 hundredths of a second, just 44 hundredths separated the top three. Max on pole, Lando second, Oscar Piastri third. He did so by setting a lap record, which kind of renews my faith in F1, in that quite clearly it doesn't matter how good or how bad your car is. As Max's pole lap showed, it is still, at the end of the day, the driver and the great drivers who make the difference.
Absolutely, Nick. Well said. I think that's a very good point, well made, in all honesty, because looking at Max Verstappen out of practice on Friday, and as we touched on in the F1 update on the Friday afternoon, Max had complained about the handling of his car, not for the first time. We've heard it in the past, usual Friday woes. But somehow Max and Red Bull often are able to get through them. On this particular occasion, after Friday practice at Suzuka, Max had turned around and said his car was flexing. Whatever that experience he was feeling, hard to ascertain, but nevertheless, that's what he said the car felt like. Now, overnight, changes were made. He'd obviously sat down with his engineers once again, because Christian Horner had talked about the work that Max have put in with the engineers over the night to get the car in a reasonable position for qualifying. And I'm just going to use the words of his engineer, Giampiero Landiassi, who, after Max had pulled off that astonishing pole position lap, just simply said, "That is insane. That is insane." And quite right too. Helmut Marko simply described Max as a phenomenon. We know exactly that's what Max is. And Christian Horner, again, extolling the virtues of Max, made clear that Red Bull had turned the car upside down, quote unquote, to try and address the issues that whatever Max had been feeling with it, that RB21 on Friday. And he has delivered one of those all-time great qualifying laps in my books, because this was McLaren's to lose. They were comfortably fastest in practice on Friday. They had the edge again in final practice. I think it was one of the McLaren's quickest in Q1. And I remember Lando definitely being comfortably quickest in Q2. So it looked like, for all intents and purposes, it was going to be a McLaren front row lockout for this particular Grand Prix. And then, wow, Max just delivers a lap of the gods. Superb, in all honesty. In fairness, it could have been beaten. Because Oscar Piastri, who was following behind Max, had actually purpled the second and third sectors. However, his first sector was not good. He'd made a couple of mistakes through it. He was actually down by 0.3 of a second on the best Q1 time, which was Lando. Managed to pull it back in Q2 and Q3. And as you say, Nick, he was only away from pole position by 0.044 seconds from Max Verstappen, just 0.012 separating Max and Lando. That gives you some idea as to how close battle it was. Barely a few paper widths between them, in all honesty, across the line. Just astonishing performance from all three of them. But Max Verstappen prevailing on this occasion, and with that rain forecast on Sunday, I know where my money's going for the Grand Prix victory. Dry race might be a different matter, because we know that the Red Bull, as we've seen so far in Australia and China, not quite as good in race trim as it has been in qualifying trim. But we'll see what the rain throws up on Sunday.
I love the phrase there you just use, lap of the gods, because I think our viewers need to let us know in the comments whereabouts you rank Max Verstappen's pole lap, not only amongst his own pole laps, but also amongst the very best pole laps in F1 history. For me, it's right up there. It was
Definitely.
a sublime lap from Max. And you also alluded there to what it looks like we have coming on Sunday, and that is, for the second time this season already, quite a bit of rain. Now, of course, Max Verstappen is who most people's money would be on anyway in the wet, let alone from pole position. I think it's going to be very difficult for anyone to beat him. One driver, though, who it could help is Alpine's Jack Doohan. A bit of a weird time to talk about him, but importantly, he, of course, had his big crash in FP2, which resulted in the entire car being replaced with the exception of the power unit. The fact he missed so much dry running, he might now be pretty pleased the fact that nobody has any wet running this weekend.
Now, just want to mention something on Jack just before I answer that question. We had
Go for it.
a number of comments beneath our F1 update on Friday, and it mentioned the fact that when I described what I had seen and heard with regard to Jack's accident, I hadn't mentioned anything about the DRS. Now, at the time we record this, folks, just to give you some ideas, the lay of the land between Nick and I, we do these videos relatively swiftly after a session, be it on a Friday, Saturday, or Sunday, because we want to get out with the video as soon as possible. Now, at that time, when I was giving my explanation, I'd obviously gone on what I'd heard, what I'd seen and heard, and that was with relation to the fact that there was a very strong tailwind down the straight, and of course the fact that the car probably bottomed out going into that turn, fast sweeping turn one. What I was unaware of at that particular time, and what eventually came out only a couple of hours after we'd recorded the video, but nevertheless it was mentioned by Ollie Opes in the Alpine team press release, confirming actually that the issue was that the DRS was open. So as I say, apologies on me, I was unaware of that, but as I say, we record at certain times. We're not always privy to all the information at any given time when we do record. So that is definitely why I didn't mention the DRS situation at that particular stage. But going on to your question, Nick, just to answer that, yes, as you say, no wet running at all for anybody around this circuit over this weekend. We've had 3 days of sunshine over the Suzuka track, which has been lovely.
And fires.
And we've had 5 fires to keep everybody warm as well.
2 more today.
2 more. 1 more in final practice, another one in...
No, 3 more. It was three more today, actually, wasn't it?
2 in
Sorry,
practice.
I'm forgetting. I'm losing count.
2 in final practice, 1 in qualifying. That we had a delay there. So we've had, that kept everybody warm. Had some sunshine, of course. Temperature's not that great, even so in Suzuka, but nevertheless, things are going to change considerably for Sunday. We are going to get some wet running. For Jack Doohan, is it a blessing in disguise? He's just going to get that car home in one piece tomorrow, whatever the weather. The last thing he's going to need, of course, is any incident in that Alpine, because we already know, so we're led to believe, that he's under pressure for that seat. He was under pressure before he'd even turned a wheel in anger in pre-season testing, because the belief was that he'd only got 5 or 6 Grand Prix to prove himself. Otherwise, reserve driver, one of the many reserve drivers, but nevertheless, the reserve driver at Alpine, Franco Colapinto, could well be in that seat at some point later in this season. Who knows? It could be for the Miami Grand Prix. It could be later in the season. That's going to be up to Flavio Briatore and Oliver Oakes to decide, of course, as to if they decide to go down the Red Bull route, shall we put it, and make an early driver change. But we know Jack's under pressure. He's going to have to deliver on Sunday. He's going to want to be as clean as a whistle as he possibly can during that Grand Prix, because he's got a lot on his plate, shall we say, going into that race.
I've got to say, something that was brilliant when we had the second fire in free practice was the fact that one of the marshals was filling up water into a traffic cone. And then that guy is my hero. I want to meet him. That is the best thing I've ever seen. Tell you what, I take my hat off to him, because I want him. That is my hero. I want to meet him. Right, let's go to... Go on.
In this day and age, and we knew the FIA were going to take measures as they had written in their statement post-practice on Friday. You kind of figured, when it talked about taking measures, that it would have been something just a little bit more sophisticated than filling up buckets with water and traffic cones with water and then pouring those over the grass around the circuit.
Oh, it's perfect.
Unbelievable. You can't make it up, Nick. You really can't. Some of these things at times.
We just need more traffic cones at every corner, and we won't have this problem. That's all we need. Let's look at another driver, though. Under a bit of pressure, Yuki Tsunoda, I mean, I think every Red Bull family driver except Max Verstappen is under pressure, and Yuki looked brilliant throughout all the practice sessions, even FP3 again, was only within a few tenths of Max, but it all went wrong in qualifying. Got through to Q2 pretty safely, as did Liam Lawson, but then mistakes for Yuki in Q2 meant that he qualified in P15, and we had a feeling this might happen. One place behind Liam Lawson. That is not a Red Bull debut qualifying to remember for Yuki.
Talk about things that you cannot make up, as I've just referred to there. That was
Yeah.
another astonishing sequence of events. From what we are led to believe, Yuki went into qualifying with a safer, for want of a better word, rear wing in terms of extracting performance. They'd loaded the rear wing, applied greater downforce. What that does, of course, folks, is allows him greater traction going through the corners. And we know that there are some very fast corners around the Suzuka circuit, but the opposite effect, of course, in adding more rear wing is that it adds to the drag, and therefore on the straights, the car is slower. Now, Yuki did okay in Q1. He got through relatively comfortably. And in Q2, if he'd been able to extract just a quarter of a tenth more out of his lap, he would have been into Q3. However, he did make mistakes. His car did have this greater wing effect on it compared to what we're led to believe with Max's car. And so that has played this part in him not getting through into Q3. It's definitely not where Red Bull will have wanted him. But to finish as well, one place behind Liam Lawson in the Racing Balls. Just one of those stories for today, one of those stories for this weekend. It's actually been a quite remarkable weekend given everything that's unfolded, all the track fires, Doohan's crash, Max's astonishing qualifying performance. What are we going to get at the Grand Prix on Sunday, Nick, particularly if it is a wet race at such a fast track?
I mean, I do not know. One thing I have a feeling we're not going to get is a McLaren win because
Ooh,
Lando
bold.
second, Oscar. Well, it is, but Lando second, Oscar third. Both drivers, I mean, took their hats off to Max's lap, and Lando kind of turned around and said, you know, for Max to do a lap as good as that, there was no beating it. But them starting second and third behind Max, and especially with the forecast tomorrow, because as we've said so many times, Max is one of the greatest drivers ever in the wet. We've seen what he can do. Given that overtaking in general is not easy around Suzuka, it's going to be, I think, quite a tough Sunday for the McLarens to try and get ahead of the Red Bull, especially if the weather does come into play.
It depends how much Red Bull has improved its race performance,
Yeah.
bearing in mind what we saw in the Australian Grand Prix. Now, Max was able to hold his own for the most part throughout that race, which was one of those mixed conditions kind of races. But
Yeah.
he did actually make a mistake, if you recall, a very rare mistake in the wet for him,
He did.
relatively early on in that Grand Prix. And as I say, pace-wise, was really, as I said, for the most part, holding his own, but it was a struggle to try and match the McLarens. Now, is it that going to be repeated during Sunday's Grand Prix? We're not quite sure. Bearing in mind what we've seen Red Bull do with its car out of Friday practice into qualifying, it's certainly given Max a far more comfortable car. He's still having issues with it. Even after that great qualifying lap today, he turned around and said that there are still things not quite right with the car. This is quite clearly a perfectionist we're talking about, folks, and why not as well? Because you don't win 4 world titles without having the perfectionist kind of attitude that Max clearly has in terms of how he wants his car specifically for him and how he likes it and how he likes to handle at any given time. So you can understand why he's still thinking, well, yeah, I've done that lap today, but for me, it's still just not quite there. Blimey, if it does actually get there at any given stage over this season, then it's going to be the car to be right now, rather than the McLarens, as we thought was going to be the case coming into qualifying. So for me, it's still a little bit up in the air. Those conditions might just work towards McLaren, and I'm only basing that on the fact of the performances that we saw out of McLaren and Red Bull in the
Yeah.
season opening Australian Grand Prix, where of course we did have wet conditions.
Very, very interesting. Just to very quickly go through the top 10 provisionally from qualifying, because as we saw this season, anything can happen before the race, especially if the rain does come. Max Verstappen's on pole position, ahead of Norris and Piastri. Charles Leclerc very pleased to be in fourth. George Russell, very disappointed to be in fifth. Kimi Antonelli in a brilliant sixth. Isaac Hadjar in an equally a brilliant P7. Lewis Hamilton eighth. Alex Albon ninth. And a pretty impressive Ollie Behrman in P10. Speaking of Lewis, I mean, Ian, he wasn't best pleased. P8 in his Ferrari. Went a different way of setup compared to Leclerc. But I mean, it just, despite the sprint win, obviously, in China and his sprint pole, it just isn't quite clicking at the moment on the whole for Lewis and Ferrari.
Yeah, it certainly didn't click in Q3, that's for sure, because it was very, very close between himself and Charles in Q1
Yeah.
and Q2. Not much between them at all. And looking at the Ferrari, even through Q1 and Q2, you were always going to suggest, well, we're looking at maybe third row best for these two guys. And, that's the way pretty much it's, well, not transpired for Lewis because he's a little bit further back, of course, but he clearly had an issue in Q3, wasn't able to get the best out of the car as he would have liked. And again, it's one of those that with right conditions, can he improve any better? Again, we saw there was a bit of a struggle in those kind of conditions in an Australian Grand Prix. So there is a lot of work to do for Ferrari and for Lewis overnight. And it's going to be one of those of, let's see how the dice rolls on Sunday and see what the conditions are, see just what we can extract out of that car. Because right now, you would suggest neither has got a podium opportunity at this particular stage.
Final talking point, and a bit of a painful one for Isaac Hadjar, who actually did brilliantly to qualify in seventh, has been jumping in and out of the car throughout Saturday, quite clearly based on onboards, in quite a bit of pain, and it's understandable why, given that his seatbelt was twisting around his, well, plums. It's a good thing he's racing for racing balls, because I think he's going to need the balls.
The balls. Blimey, that's a good one.
Thank you very much.
Balls, yeah. Yes,
Painful.
Poor old Isaac. Painful. I mean, at one stage, he was even apologizing for the fact, look, guys, if I don't get out of Q1, then this is on me type thing. And you really felt for him. You had an idea it was seatbelt related, but you had no idea that actually it was going to be in such a painful area for him. So the fact that he managed to get through qualifying, the fact that he qualified seventh was, ahead of Liam, ahead of Yuki. Are we now going to look at Isaac Hadjar as the next Max Verstappen teammate
Well,
if Yuki's doesn't perform over the next 3 or 4 Grand Prix? Anyway, I digress. But yes, hats off to Isaac. Just well done, mate, because that was ballsy, shall we say, to deliver that kind of drive in those kind of circumstances. Superb, Isaac. Well done.
Could feel his pain. Ian, amazing stuff as always. For those who are watching this F1 update, be sure to let us know in the comment section below your thoughts on qualifying, your predictions ahead of the race. We like some bold predictions as well, so be sure to let us know. And hopefully we do get a very exciting Grand Prix. If you can smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, that would be absolutely amazing. This has been the post-qualifying F1 update from myself and Ian. We will see you after the race. Will it be wet? Fingers crossed on Sunday. See you later.
Take care, folks.